I'm Matt Peachey. I'm Economic Development Manager at the City Council. And yeah, I'll take the next 20 minutes or so to give you a sense of a positive look forward, I would hope, but positive realism around where we think, as a local authority, our emerging thinking on what the economic impacts and trends of the last period around coronavirus are going to lead us. And also our thinking around our recovery plan. We've been, doing some long and hard thinking about how we can forge a better recovery, a more sustainable recovery, and a more inclusive recovery. Some of that stuff we can do ourselves. Some of that stuff, obviously, is about our partnerships and about the way we engage with our business community. So we're really keen to get your views on some of the stuff I'll talk about today. So some of the key impacts and trends, and bear in mind, you can get quite gloomy about where this recession we're looking at might lead us, but we are thinking let's be positive, let's be realistic. There are plenty of statistics that suggest we are in for a serious economic hit, but it doesn't mean that we can't forge opportunities together as a local area. So I think you'll have all seen these different shapes of recession. This is an unprecedented demand shock that we've had in the global and national economy, and it will affect Oxford. There's no doubt about that. Where we've seen furloughing, where we've seen redundancies, it's clear that what's happened is that some of the lower paid, lower skilled jobs are the ones that are getting affected first. So there is a real risk that with the recession that comes forward, that actually it worsens inequality. So I think we need to work together to do something about that, and that's certainly within the council's thinking as well. And we don't actually know what this recovery will look like. What we do know, though, is that it isn't set in stone as yet. So yes, we may not be looking at a V-shaped recovery. I think that most feel that's not realistic. We can do things locally to stimulate that recovery. I'm really keen we talk about that today. It seems with coronavirus, it's affected the most developed countries the hardest in some ways. And with Oxford, you saw key sectors like tourism being hit very hard, credit card transactions reducing by 56% in the last 3 weeks of March versus, say, 36% in the rest of the country. So you can see that spend that where we rely on tourists, I think, got a bigger hit, and where we rely on visitors and students, we're now seeing those risks around universities and our education employers. All those kind of sectors that we felt were rock solid are experiencing a hit, and we have to be realistic about that. Doesn't mean they can't bounce back, but we do have to work quite hard to do that. And that complacency that we've sometimes had in Oxford, we need to shake that off and make sure we are aware of all the risks and all the opportunities. And what this is also doing, the Oxford model, we are a local authority that relies on trading from leasing. We rely on car parking revenue. We rely on having a successful business community. Our wriggle room as a set of councils in the county is somewhat constrained. 12 million budget gap for the city council coming up this year potentially. So we need to look at how we can evolve as a service when we're trying to promote a recovery as well. We faced some of the same challenges that businesses do. Some of the same challenges, not all of them. Of course, everybody talks about this 10 years change in 10 months. There are going to be some, there are two ways this could go. It could be that we have quite a big return to normal, and actually, we forget what this last 3 months has been like, and people just go back to the way they were before. We don't think that's going to happen, and we want to encourage the positives while we have this window. So that concept of building back better, of traveling when you need to travel, of having a more blended approach to when you come into work and when you don't, all of those kind of things around how we can stimulate a better response in terms of transport choices, in terms of using your bike, using active modes, getting back to using public transport in a safe way rather than everyone just getting back in their car. All of those kind of things are going to change, and the way people work, where they work, we think are going to change as well. So to understand that and to be aware of that and to try and encourage the good parts of that is something we're keen to do. Yes, there's going to be accelerated change on the high street, but at the same time, we're still well aware that there are a number of businesses looking to locate within the city centre in the retail sector. This talk of the death of retail may be overblown, but it's certainly a trend that we do need to look at, and it does provide that opportunity for change within our city centre. So all of these trends are happening, but the opportunity we have when there's been such a big shock as the one we've had is to reset things, to think about the things that were within our local economy and the way we're working, the things that were perhaps not working. Let's look at how we can do that thing of building back better, which everybody's been talking about, fairer, more sustainable, and still building on our competitive strengths. Let's not forget that the vaccine could be live from September in the most positive of scenarios, and it could be invented here in Oxford. What a shot in the arm that would be, pardon the pun, for Oxford to be that place that provided that cure. And we need to look at building on some of those key strengths we have as an economy. Now, into what we're thinking about in terms of recovery and trends. So that's the trends. Now, how are we thinking about moving things forward and generating this economic recovery? First of all, phases. We've been talking very closely with the LEP, with businesses, with central government, and we think we're moving to a phased approach. The response phase is the one we're in now, crisis business support, trying to help businesses as much as we can, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we are starting to move into that restart phase. We're seeing businesses reopening. We're seeing that government guidance is changing over these last 2 weeks, and we will get that gradual reopening between now and July and onwards. And it's a case of what can we do within that restart phase to make sure that we haven't got a 70% economy or a 60% economy. Let's see if we can get to that 90% economy, which you'll have seen talked about. It's a case of what you can do in slightly constrained circumstances in terms of changing the way we operate our businesses and the way we operate our local economy and the place as well. From that sort of 6 to 18 month period, I think we are going to be looking at, perhaps, depending on where we're at with vaccine and where we're at with the virus, we're looking at an extended period of probable restrictions, social distancing, but some kind of return to a new normal. And I think that period is particularly interesting because it will solidify some of the recovery, but within a different context. And it's an opportunity to sustain our economy, to be positioned, resilient for success for the long term. And renew, we call this renew, we call it reorientate, you could call it build back better, but this is about the fact that the economy that we have in Oxford and globally was restructuring anyway. We expect that restructuring, with certain sectors perhaps shrinking and others growing, that will be accelerated. The question is, how can you manage that in a way that makes sure that local residents have employment opportunities and can change direction from one to another? Things like adult education, that kind of thing is important. How do we make sure that we are well positioned to pivot? B4, a good example of a business that's pivoted very quickly during this early phase, but people are going to have to do that. Bigger businesses are going to have to do that. There is a real challenge there in terms of how we collectively pivot and do manage that structural change in an effective way that works. So we have an economic strategy that we were developing at about the time this kicked off. We had a session with our Economic Growth Board around about the middle of March. It was just about the first one we did on Teams. It worked very well, but we were conscious that what we were presenting as an economic strategy, and it's here, is going to be developed in a very, very different concept. That said, having looked at it and having looked at what the impact of COVID-19 is, these we feel are still fundamentals to Oxford's success. It's a compact global city. It's one that has the potential to have a very powerful and influential economy. It already does. And some of the traits that it needs to work on to deliver on that powerful economy are here: talented population, world-class culture, global influence, open and diverse population, livable neighborhoods. And I think neighborhoods will become slightly more important alongside our city centre. Good connectivity and building off the fact we have a unique physical environment. Despite what's happened this year, we still have a very strong set of fundamentals to grow our economy from, and we want to do that in an inclusive and sustainable way. So that said, in this recovery plan period, in this restart and recover period, we can't ignore the fact that we are looking at different actions. We need to restart the business sector where many businesses have been in dormant for a period of time. Some people will be made redundant and will need to get back to work. Some people will have been furloughed and need to get back to work, and that poses its own challenges as well. Are there opportunities for people to be training and looking at wider career opportunities whilst they're on furlough, as many could be on furlough till October? So getting people back into work that they're already in, but furloughed from, or getting into new jobs are going to be important. There's a lot of work happening through colleagues of mine, our city centre manager and other colleagues, and also the county council, to look at how we can safely give consumers and businesses the confidence to reopen based on all the guidelines, and make sure that we're putting things in place to allow that opening to happen at a greater level than it may have otherwise happened. So we feel that's really important. Given that there's a likelihood that some of the redundancies may affect areas of disadvantage, but also that that essentially we're looking at neighbourhoods that may have found a new purpose. If you consider some of the district centres that you have across Oxford, perhaps some of those district centres now have a new and bigger role, and people will perhaps be working from home in those areas, perhaps that they look more to their neighbourhood centres. So we feel there's an opportunity to bring together neighbourhood regeneration at district centres, and that's something we're exploring quite closely. Depending on what happens with property and property markets post COVID-19, we don't know whether we're going to have 115 vacant units in the city centre, or actually whether it won't be too bad. Maybe we will have similar vacancy levels before. Remember, Oxford was quite successful in terms of the number of occupied units, and if anything, it was the supply of units for businesses to occupy that was a problem. So I think depending on which way the property market goes, we may have the opportunity to use our own commercial assets, and so may other landlords, in a different way to try and generate that recovery. Obviously, one way of generating recovery is infrastructure, and there's some key infrastructure projects for Oxford, which I'll go on to talk about, which we'd like to bring forward. Just checking time here, so I'm conscious we haven't got too long to discuss. And building on our economic strengths, life sciences, and all of the technology sectors that are coming through the university, we need to build on those as well. So a couple of things I'd like to just flag, because I don't want to spend the whole 25 minutes talking at you. I'd like to have a discussion. Within our response phase, we have been trying to help businesses to access the right support and funding and answer the questions they have in what's been a rapidly evolving environment. If you look at the bottom of your screen here, the City Council this week, using BEIS funding and the other local authorities across the county, have launched their discretionary grant fund. If you are a business that is in one of the groups that perhaps hasn't been able to access support to date, that could be those based in shared offices, it could be those that are charities or social enterprises, it could be those that are perhaps traders with other fixed costs, market traders, that kind of thing. If you're in a business that's unable to access support, do have a look. B&Bs that pay council tax rather than business rates, for example. The website address you need to look at is oxford.gov.uk/discretionary grant, and I'll share that in the chat afterwards. But we've launched that grant this week. The deadline for applications is the 14th, so I'd encourage anyone to look and see whether they're eligible if they are looking for funding opportunities to get through this next period. In the restart phase, this is particularly important for the City Council at the moment, really within our own City Council-led initiatives. The key thing we want to do is to communicate when we can that Oxford City Centre and the district centres are open, but of course they're safe, and we need to provide that assurance on safety measures both to consumers and travellers that want visitors, but we also need to communicate that to businesses so they understand how they can reopen, and I think that's going to be a key element of our communication with the business community going forward. Beyond that, there are things that we can do working with you as a business community. There are probably, if we look at the bottom of the slide here, there are opportunities to consider, and I know experience Oxfordshire are looking at this, that local staycation market. 70% of people usually go on that that usually go on that foreign holiday won't. They'll stay here in the UK. So there is an opportunity for Oxford and Oxfordshire to attract those local visitors, and that minimises some of that pain of losing international visitors. And we're working with various partners on that to try and make that happen in the best way, particularly from a opening up perspective. But also there are other sectors that are doing very well, science and technology and so on, where they're actually looking at new funding rounds, looking at new treatments. We need to actually look at where those near-term growth opportunities are, and actually we're interested in understanding from you as businesses where you feel those growth opportunities are, because what the council would like to do is to work to support and promote those. We feel that structural change, those opportunities will come forward in the coming months. So that's the restart phase. I won't dwell on all of it because I'm conscious of time. As we move to recovery, and I will just say these phases are of course not set in stone. There are a blurred line between them. We don't know the exact timescales, but they're helpful in terms of planning this phasing of recovery. So city council led initiatives. We are looking at a range of potential workspaces at the moment, which we have funding to bring forward to support business startups and to support established businesses in a more flexible way. There'll be a new normal in terms of office use, and we're looking to understand that at this stage. So when we bring those assets forward as lettable premises, that they make sense for the user and meet needs. And we'll look at our own asset plan as a landlord to do so as well. Can we look at the neighbourhood centres that we have across the city as enterprise and training centres for business partnerships? We feel there's an opportunity there. And something which we were doing around about the turn of the year was getting ready to set up an inclusive economy commission for the county, looking at how we can generate a fairer economy, working with the anchor institutions such as the universities who've been heavily involved in this, but also the other local authorities, county council, and other big employers. We feel it's still really important that what we do is we bring together the biggest employers who are anchor institutions and look at how we can generate a more inclusive and fair economic recovery. And we can do that through a number of means. One of the big community wealth building. How are we spending locally? Is that spend more local than it is further afield? And what types of social value and environmental benefits are we trying to generate with that spend as well? So I think that's something where we can work with local supply chains more closely, both within the anchor institutions, but the smaller suppliers as well. Colleagues of mine are looking at bringing together some community and based business workshops to look at innovative restart proposals. You only need to see what some businesses have been doing to pivot during this last period. That this challenge we've had, this disruption, provides an opportunity for businesses to look at adapting and evolving and becoming more resilient. That's been very obvious, for example, in the food sector, where the way food deliveries have been done has changed, for example, particularly in the smaller businesses. We can do more of that in other areas and should plan for this type of thing, if not this exact thing, happening again. So, let's try and generate more innovative businesses. We are working quite closely with Oxlep and with the other local authorities. We feel there will be a need for government funding to bring forward the recovery quicker. Some of the entrepreneurs we have in the city and the county will be constrained. Some businesses will be suffering. So how do we generate a fund that doesn't just look at plugging the gap whilst businesses are in limbo, but actually looks ahead? It's an investment fund to bring business ideas to fruition. So we feel that's a key area to explore. How do you fund the next new businesses that will come forward? I talked about infrastructure. Oxford Station redevelopment is an investment decision that will happen early next year. If that happens, we get East-West Rail between here and Cambridge. We need to be pushing for those types of investments even harder than before, because they will be really important to our future economy. Also digital investment, for example, what are the needs there? And our wider West End, so Oxpens, the Oseney site, some of the other sites that are owned by the colleges in and around the West End. We have an opportunity to bring those forward, but we bring them forward in a new environment. So there's some reflection there, but there's still a big opportunity for Oxford to grow off those fundamentals. And of course, yes, visitor economy will change. I know I've seen Hayley speak on this in the last couple of days from Experience Oxfordshire at this event, but there will be an opportunity. Oxford is still an amazing place to visit. and it will retain that attraction. It's just a question of how we bounce back and what the vision is, both for promotion and attraction of visitors, but also how we as a city and a county council help and work alongside those organisations such as Experience Oxfordshire to manage it.